The rain beat against the tall windows of the Cross Industries boardroom with a steady rhythm, sharp and unrelenting, like nature itself pounding out a warning. Each drop seemed to echo inside Elena's chest, keeping time with the wild drumming of her heart. She sat stiffly in the leather chair, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to summon strength from the memory of her father's voice. He had once told her that music could save the soul, but music hadn't saved him. It hadn't saved his school either, now strangled under the crushing weight of debt. And so, at 22, Elena found herself here, sitting across from a man she barely knew, but whose reputation whispered power, danger, and salvation in the same breath. Damien Cross was not a man who blended into any room. Even now, silent behind his massive mahogany desk, he seemed to command the space, as though the room itself bent to his will. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately groomed, but a faint scar cut across his temple, a small mark that hinted at a past no amount of wealth could erase. His suit fit him like it had been stitched to his very skin, but it was his eyes, steel gray, cold and assessing, that held her in place. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and built an empire out of the wreckage. "Elena," he said at last, his voice low, smooth, but edged with steel. It wrapped around her like velvet hiding a blade. "I don't waste time, and I expect you won't either. You know why you're here." Her throat was dry, but she managed a nod. She knew. Everyone in the city knew Damien Cross did nothing without purpose, nothing without calculation. He had summoned her, the daughter of a ruined musician, into his world, and now her future trembled in his hands. "My father's school," she began, her voice faltering, "is drowning." Damien finished for her. He leaned back, fingers steepled, gaze unwavering. "The creditors are circling like vultures. You've run out of time and out of options. Except for me." Shame burned in her cheeks, but she lifted her chin anyway. "And what is it you expect in return?" His lips curved, not quite into a smile. "Honesty. I like that. I'll be blunt. I require a wife, not forever. 1 year." He paused, letting the words settle between them like a challenge. A marriage, visible to the world, convincing enough to silence gossip, to stabilize the markets during a delicate merger. "In exchange, I will erase every cent of your father's debt. You will walk away with enough to rebuild his legacy tenfold." Elena's pulse thundered. Marriage. To this man. To a stranger who looked at her like she was another acquisition, another asset in his vast empire. The thought made her tremble, though not entirely with fear. "You want me to pretend to love you?" she asked softly. "I want you to convince everyone we're inseparable," Damien said, his voice dropping lower, darker. "That means family, society, the board, and most importantly, my enemies. They will be watching us for weakness, and if they see any crack in the facade, they will use you to get to me." The air in the room seemed heavier now, charged with something dangerous. Elena clasped her hands tighter. "And when the year ends, you'll be free, with more money than you've ever dreamed of, with security no one can take from you." His eyes narrowed. "But you will not walk into this lightly. Once you accept, there is no going back." The rain lashed harder against the glass, like the storm itself was demanding her answer. Elena thought of her father's smile, the pride in his eyes when he first opened the music school. She thought of the letters from creditors, the threats that arrived like daggers in the mail. She thought of what it would mean to surrender, for her freedom, her innocence, her dreams of true love, to a man who saw her as necessity. But then she looked into Damien's storm-gray eyes and saw something flicker, something raw, almost vulnerable, quickly buried beneath the iron facade. It was enough to make her believe there might be more to him than the Tycoon, more than the cold bargain. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I'll do it." Damien rose to his full height, tall and imposing, the very storm made flesh. He circled the desk with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to control. and when he stood before her, he extended his hand. Then from this moment forward, Elena, you belong to me. Her fingers slid into his, and as the weight of the bargain sealed itself between them, Elena realized she had not just agreed to save her father's dream. She had stepped willingly into a storm of her own, one that could destroy her, or transform her, forever. The city skyline glittered beyond the tinted windows of Damien's limousine as Elena sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. Every bump in the road rattled through her bones, as if her body refused to settle into the decision she had made. Her reflection in the darkened glass looked unfamiliar. A girl who had once spent her days teaching children to play the piano now stared back as a woman bound by a bargain that felt more like a chain. Damien sat across from her, one leg crossed casually over the other, his expression unreadable in the dim interior light. His phone buzzed, and he ignored it, his gaze fixed on her with unsettling precision. There was no warmth in his eyes, only calculation, as though she were already another piece of his empire being positioned exactly where he wanted. Do you regret it already? His voice was smooth, almost mocking, but there was something lurking underneath, a note of curiosity she could not quite name. No, she whispered, though her throat was dry. I knew what I was agreeing to. His lips curved faintly, a gesture that was not quite a smile. Good, because there are things you need to understand if you were to play this part convincingly. The word part stung more than she expected. She turned toward him, gathering courage from the storm raging outside. What exactly are you asking of me? Damien leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his presence filling the space between them. You are not just wearing a ring. You are becoming the symbol of everything I have built. My shareholders, my rivals, the press, every last one of them will be watching you. One slip, one doubt in your eyes, one crack in the illusion, and they will rip us both apart. His intensity made her pulse quicken. She swallowed hard. And if I succeed, then you will have saved your father's legacy and bought yourself a future most people only dream of. His tone softened only slightly. But if you fail, Elena, if you falter even once, you may not live to see that future. The words struck cold through her chest. She stared at him wide-eyed. What are you saying? He tapped a finger against the tinted glass as if pointing to the city itself. There are people out there who would use you to destroy me. Vincent Romano, chief among them. You've never met him, but you will hear his name whispered in places you do not expect. He will see you as an opportunity, a weapon to wield against me. Fear knotted in her stomach, but it tangled with something else, a strange, dangerous thrill at being thrust into a world larger and darker than anything she had known. Why me? She asked softly. Out of all the women you could have chosen, why me? For the first time, Damien's eyes flickered with something more human. Because you were untouched, untainted, pure in a world that reeks of corruption. He let the words hang in the air before continuing. And because I saw you before you ever knew I existed. Her breath caught in her throat. Saw me, at your father's school. I was considering acquiring the property when his debts deepened. I watched you. You teaching children through the window. You smiled as if the music was enough to keep the whole world alive. I had forgotten what that looked like. The admission unsettled her more than his threats. The ruthless Tycoon had been watching her quietly before this arrangement ever began. She did not know whether to feel flattered or frightened. The car slowed before pulling up to the towering glass facade of the Cross residence. The building loomed against the stormy night like a monument to power. As the driver opened her door, Elena hesitated, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the diamond ring Damien had placed on her hand. Once she stepped inside, she would no longer be just Elena, daughter of a failed musician. She would be Mrs. Cross, a name the city would weigh heavily on. Damien extended his hand. Are you ready to begin? Lightning split the sky behind him, illuminating the sharp planes of his face, the scar at his temple, the storm in his eyes. And though every instinct in her body screamed of danger, she placed her hand in his and whispered, yes. The doors to his world closed around her, and Elena knew there was no turning back. She was walking not into safety, but into the heart of a tempest, where desire and danger waited side by side. The gala hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and golden light, but to Elena it felt like a stage where every movement was scrutinized. The air buzzed with perfume, laughter, and the subtle edge of gossip that flowed like invisible smoke through the crowd. She walked at Damien's side, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back. Every eye seemed to follow them, measuring, calculating, wondering what a man like Damien Cross saw in a girl like her. The cameras flashed when they entered. Elena forced a smile, her stomach tight with nerves, but Damien leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Hold your head higher, they are waiting for you to stumble." His voice was low, firm, and it steadied her more than she wanted to admit. She raised her chin, her green eyes catching the lights, and suddenly she was no longer the anxious daughter of a failed music teacher. She was Mrs. Cross, and the room seemed to bend around the illusion of her confidence. Whispers swirled as they moved among the city's elite. Some women smiled with thin lips, their jewels glittering like weapons, while others glanced at Damien with longing that made Elena's skin prickle. She tried to ignore them, but she caught fragments of words. "Too young," "bought and paid for," "a scandal in the making." Each phrase cut her, but she walked on, feeling Damien's steady presence anchoring her. When the music shifted to a softer melody, Damien guided her onto the dance floor. The touch of his hand against hers sent a jolt of heat through her, unexpected and unwelcome. He drew her close enough that the world blurred around them. "Keep your eyes on me," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "They're watching, and you must look as though you belong to me." She did as he asked, her gaze locked on the storm-gray depths of his eyes. For a moment, the performance felt dangerously real. The way his hand pressed against her back, the strength in his hold, the faint scar near his temple that whispered of battles he never spoke of. Something about him pulled at her, even as fear pressed tight around her chest. Halfway through the dance, Damien's body stiffened. He tilted his head just slightly, his expression unchanged to the watching crowd, but Elena felt the shift in his energy. Without warning, he spun her gracefully so her back was to him, his arm firm around her waist. "Smile," he commanded softly, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Don't look, but Romano is here." The name sent a chill racing down her spine. She forced her lips into a bright expression as if nothing were amiss. "Where?" she whispered. "By the bar, in the shadows. He never shows himself without reason. That means ton. It is not about me, it is about you." Her pulse thundered as she fought to keep her body moving with the music. Damien's hold tightened, his calm smile never faltering as he led her across the floor. To the guests, it was a dance, a husband drawing his young bride close. To Elena, it was a shield, a warning, a reminder that her life was no longer her own. When the song ended, Damien kissed her hand with deliberate slowness, his lips lingering just enough to make the gesture convincing. The crowd applauded lightly, but Elena's mind was a storm. Somewhere in the Golden Hall, a man she had never met watched her like a predator studying prey, and though she stood beside one of the most powerful men in the city, she realized she had just become the target of a war she did not yet understand. As they left the floor, Damien's whisper was almost a growl. "Remember this night, Elena. The game has truly begun." The city had gone quiet when they returned to Damien's penthouse, but Elena's thoughts refused to settle. The gala still lingered in her mind, the bright chandeliers, the whispers that clung to her like smoke, and most of all the knowledge that Vincent Romano had been watching her. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the rain streaking down the glass, when she felt Damien's presence behind her. He did not speak at first. His silence was heavy, like the pause before thunder. "You did well tonight." His voice was low, carrying a strange mix of approval and warning. "But this is only the beginning." Elena turned to face him. Her green eyes shimmered with both defiance and fear. "Why does he want me?" she asked. "I am nothing to him." Damien stepped closer, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over her smaller frame. To Romano, you are not nothing. You are leverage. He would see you as a weakness in me, and he is not wrong. The admission startled her. She searched his eyes, waiting for the mask of control to settle back into place, but instead she saw the faintest flicker of vulnerability. It vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by steel. Damien poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light. He did not sit, did not relax. He stood as though expecting a battle at any moment. 5 years ago, Romano destroyed someone I loved. He let the words hang in the air, sharp as broken glass. My wife, Caroline. She was carrying our child when her car was forced off the road. Elena's breath caught, the glass walls of the penthouse spinning around her. I thought it was an accident, she whispered. So did the police. Damien's jaw tightened. But I know the truth. Romano had been pressing me to sell him a series of properties. When I refused, he took something he knew I could never replace. The room felt colder, as if the storm outside had seeped into its walls. Elena's heart ached for him, for the man who had built his empire on control, yet could not protect the people he loved most. For a moment she forgot her own fear. She reached out, her hand brushing his wrist. I am sorry, Damien. His eyes flicked to her touch, and for a heartbeat he looked almost human, stripped of the ruthless mask he wore like armor. But then his gaze hardened again. Do not pity me, Elena. Pity makes men weak. I need you strong because Romano will come for you. The words lodged in her chest like a stone. She pulled her hand back, trembling. Why tell me this now? Because you deserve to know what kind of storm you are stepping into. He studied her face, as though weighing her very soul. I chose you for a reason. Not just because you were untainted, but because I believed you could endure the fire. The confession left her unsteady. He had chosen her not only as a pawn, but as someone he intended to test, to mold, to bind to his world. A sharp knock at the penthouse door shattered the moment. Damien's head turned instantly, his body tensing. Stay here, he ordered. But Elena's curiosity burned hotter than her fear. From the shadow of the hallway, she glimpsed 2 suited men waiting. One of them slipped a sealed envelope into Damien's hand before vanishing into the stormy night. Damien opened it slowly, his expression unreadable until his eyes darkened like thunderclouds. He crushed the paper in his fist, the veins in his hand standing out against his skin. What is it? Elena asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Romano is no longer watching from the shadows. He has made his first move. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Whatever this marriage had begun as, Elena now understood. It was no longer only about debts or appearances. She had stepped into a battle where love and survival were dangerously intertwined, and the cost of failure could be her life. The morning sun spilled across the city, but inside Damien's penthouse there was no sense of calm. The envelope from the night before still lay on the table, torn open, its contents spread like a silent threat. Elena stood over it, her pulse racing as her eyes traced the photographs inside. They were of her, at the music school, at the cemetery visiting her father's grave, even standing by Damien's side at the gala only hours ago. Each picture carried the same cold signature, proof that someone had been watching her long before she became Damien's wife. She looked up at him, fear tightening in her throat. How long has this been happening? Damien's jaw was set like stone. Too long. Romano's men have been shadowing you since the day your father's debts became public. That is why I moved quickly with the marriage. You were already a target. Elena's hands trembled as she gathered the photographs. My father's debts. You think Romano had something to do with them? I don't think, Damien said flatly. I know. He buys debts like other men buy property. He waits until people are desperate enough to sell their souls. Then he uses them until they break. Her knee was weakened at his words. She sank into a chair, clutching the pictures like broken glass. So he would have come for me even if you hadn't. Damien's gaze softened just slightly. And he would have destroyed you. That is something I will not allow. The words carried a weight that sent a confusing rush of heat through her chest. He spoke as if she belonged to him, as if protecting her was no longer just strategy, but something far more dangerous. Before she could respond, Damien's phone rang sharply. He answered without hesitation, his voice clipped, commanding. When he ended the call, his expression was darker than she had ever seen. Romano sent a message last night, not just with those photographs, with blood. Elena's heart lurched. What do you mean? One of my men was found dead near the docks. They left a note carved into his skin. His eyes locked on hers, hard and unyielding. It said, "Tell your new bride she looks better in white." The room spun. Her breath caught. The wedding gown. The photographs. Romano had been close enough to touch her, to mark her with his threats. Damien crossed the space between them in a heartbeat. His hand closed around her wrist, not cruelly but firmly, grounding her trembling body. This is no longer a game, Elena. Romano will not stop until one of us is destroyed. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. You told me to be strong, she whispered. Then tell me what I have to do. For the first time, a shadow of hesitation crossed his face. He studied her as if searching for the limits of her courage. You must become more than my wife in name. You must become my shield. If the world believes we are inseparable, Romano cannot touch you without declaring war on me. Elena's breath shook, but she lifted her chin. And if he does not care about declaring war, then Damien said, his voice dropping low and dangerous, I will burn his empire to ash before I let him take you. The vow filled the air like fire, terrifying and intoxicating. Elena realized with a jolt that whatever bargain she had made was no longer simple. She was bound to a man whose war had already claimed lives, and her own fate had become the weapon both men were willing to fight for. And deep inside her, beneath the fear, something darker stirred, an unwilling thrill at the idea of being wanted so fiercely that even death could not scare it away. The storm broke over the city that night, wind howling against the glass of Damien's penthouse like a warning from the heavens. Elena sat on the edge of the velvet couch, her hands twisting in her lap as Damien spoke quietly into his phone across the room. His voice was sharp, controlled, the kind of voice that commanded men to obey without question. She could only catch fragments. Security, sweep the perimeter, double the guard. But each word told her more clearly than any speech that danger was no longer a distant shadow. It was at their door. When he ended the call, he crossed to her, his expression unreadable. We cannot stay here, he said. Romano's reach is long, and I will not risk you becoming his message again. Where will we go? She asked, her voice tight with both fear and defiance. To a place he cannot easily follow. His eyes lingered on hers, storm gray and unyielding. But once we leave this house, Elena, there will be no turning back to the life you knew. She swallowed hard, thinking of her father's school, the laughter of children in its halls, the only life she had known before Damien Cross stepped into her world. That life was already gone, she realized. She had traded it for survival, for the bargain that now bound her to a man who could both protect and destroy her. They left under the cover of night, Damien's hand firm on her back as if guiding her through a battlefield. The car cut through slick streets until the skyline gave way to the dark edges of the countryside. An estate rose out of the storm like a fortress, its high walls and iron gates promising both safety and confinement. Guards with earpieces flanked the entrance, their eyes sharp and their weapons hidden but ready. This is one of my safe houses, Damien explained as the gates clanged shut behind them. Only a handful of people even know it exists. Inside, the air was hushed, the rooms vast and cold. Elena followed Damien down a long corridor until he stopped before a locked steel door. He entered a code, and the heavy mechanism released with a low hiss. What is this place? She whispered. The truth, he said simply, and led her inside. The room was filled with files, photographs, maps, all pinned across the walls like a web of obsession. Romano's name was scrawled across headlines, his face staring out from surveillance stills, his empire dissected piece by piece. Elena's gaze swept over the evidence, her chest tightening as she realized how deep Damien's war had already gone. You asked why he wants you, Damien said, his voice low behind her. It is not only because you are my wife. It is because your father's debts were tied to him in ways you never knew. He pulled a file from the table and handed it to her. Inside was a contract, her father's signature scrawled at the bottom. The creditor was a shell company, and at the top of the page sat a name she recognized now with chilling clarity. Vincent Romano. Her breath caught. My father owed him directly. Not just owed him, Damien corrected. He promised your school as collateral. Romano was circling you long before I ever offered you this arrangement. I married you not just to protect myself, Elena. I married you to protect you. The revelation sent a tremor through her body. She had thought she was paying her father's debts with her freedom, but the truth was far darker. She had already been marked long before Damien came into her life. A sudden crash echoed through the estate, sharp against the storm. Damien's head snapped toward the sound, his body instantly tense. Stay here, he commanded, his voice low but urgent. Elena's heart pounded as footsteps thundered down the corridor. She realized then that the safe house was no sanctuary at all. Romano had found them, and whatever secrets Damien had yet to reveal were about to be tested in blood. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the safe house into darkness. The storm outside howled louder as if it had swallowed the electricity whole. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she pressed back against the wall, her fingers clutching the folder that still trembled in her hands. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of the old estate a threat waiting to step forward. Damien moved swiftly, his presence a dark silhouette against the faint glow of lightning beyond the tall windows. He reached into the desk, retrieving a weapon with the ease of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His voice was calm but edged with steel. They cut the power. That means they are already inside. Her pulse raced so violently she thought her heart might tear itself free. How many, she whispered. Enough, he answered grimly. But not enough to take me alive. A sharp crash shattered the corridor outside, the sound of splintering wood and heavy boots striking marble. Elena pressed herself into the corner, every nerve screaming for her to run, but her body refused to move. Damien turned toward her, his eyes fierce even in the dark. Whatever happens, do not leave this room. Do you understand? She wanted to argue, to tell him she could not just sit in silence while Romano's men tore through the house, but the force in his voice pinned her to the spot. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. The door rattled violently, then burst open. Figures in black stormed into the room, their faces hidden, weapons raised. For a split second, Elena thought Damien might surrender. Instead, he moved with the precision of a predator. Shots thundered, flashes of light illuminating the chaos. Men dropped, others cursed, the room filling with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Elena ducked behind the desk, covering her head, but the screams and groans of wounded men filled her ears. She risked a glance and saw Damien fighting like a man possessed, every motion deadly, every strike brutal. He was not the polished tycoon she had met in the boardroom. He was something far more dangerous, something born of grief and sharpened by vengeance. One of the attackers lunged toward her. Before she could even scream, Damien was there, pulling the man back with a roar that made the air shake. His hand snapped around the intruder's neck, a sound of bone breaking cutting through the storm. The man crumpled lifeless to the floor. Elena stared, frozen, horror and awe crashing together inside her. This was the truth Damien had kept buried beneath suits and silk ties. He was not just a man who fought battles in boardrooms. He was a man who had walked through blood to build his empire. When the last intruder fled into the night, leaving only silence and bodies behind, Damien turned to her. His chest rose and fell heavily, sweat darkening his shirt, his eyes burning like molten steel. "Are you afraid of me now?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Elena could barely breathe. She should have been terrified. She should have recoiled from the brutality she had just witnessed, but instead she felt something deeper, something more dangerous. "No," she whispered. "I'm afraid of losing you." For the first time, Damien's hardened expression cracked. He crossed to her, cupping her face in hands still warm from violence. Then hold on to me, Elena, because this was only the beginning. And as thunder rolled above them, Elena knew their first night together would no longer be marked by innocence or tenderness. It would be marked by blood and secrets that would bind them forever. The safe house reeked of gunpowder and rain-soaked leather. The bodies had been cleared, but the silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Elena sat curled in the corner of the study, her nightgown torn at the hem where she had stumbled against broken wood. Her hands would not stop shaking. Damien stood at the window, his shirt streaked with blood that was not his own, the lines of his body taut as a bowstring. He had not spoken since the last intruder fell. When he finally turned, the weight of his gaze pinned her in place. His steel-gray eyes were darker now, the kind of dark forged in grief and sharpened by years of war. "You weren't supposed to see that side of me," he said, his voice low and raw. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. "I had to. It's part of who you are." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room like the storm itself. "No, it is the part that destroys everything it touches." His hand ran over the scar at his temple, almost unconsciously, as if tracing old sins. She rose on unsteady legs, her fear giving way to something stronger. "You protected me. You think that makes you a monster, but to me, it means I am still alive." His jaw tightened, as though her words cut deeper than any bullet. He turned away, pouring whiskey into a crystal glass with hands that trembled despite his controlled exterior. He drained it in one swallow before setting it down with deliberate force. "Romano is escalating. He doesn't just want to scare us. He wants to remind me of Caroline. He wants me to remember how she died." The name lingered like a ghost. Elena's breath caught. "Caroline, your wife?" His eyes flickered to hers. "She wasn't just my wife, Elena. She was pregnant. 8 months. Romano arranged the accident to punish me. I buried them both the same day." His voice cracked on the last word, the first crack she had ever heard in his iron mask. Elena's chest ached. She reached for him without thinking, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he closed his eyes, as though her touch burned and soothed him at once. "I was selfish," he whispered. "I married you because I wanted to protect you, yes, but also because I wanted something I should not have. I wanted to believe I could start again." Her heart raced at his confession, torn between fear and longing. Damien Cross, the man who commanded empires and shattered enemies, was confessing that he had wanted her not as a pawn, but as a lifeline. Before she could speak, the phone on the desk buzzed violently. Damien snatched it up, his expression darkening as he listened. When he hung up, his fists clenched. "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice barely steady. "Romano has moved faster than I expected," Damien said. "He is not just watching. He has already bought people inside my own company, men I trusted for years." Her stomach turned. "Then nowhere is safe." His gaze burned into hers, fierce and unyielding. "There is only one place left that might be, and it will demand more from you than anything else I have asked." "Tell me," she whispered. He stepped so close she could feel the heat of him, his breath brushing her cheek. "If we are to survive, Elena, you cannot just be my wife in name. You must be my partner in every sense, body, mind, and soul, because if Romano believes for 1 second that this marriage is a lie, he will destroy us both." Her heart pounded at the weight of his words. This was no longer only about debts, or survival, or even appearances. This was about surrendering herself to a man whose past was filled with blood and whose future could consume her completely. Lightning split the sky beyond the window, and in its flash she saw him clearly. Not just the Tycoon, not just the predator, but a man standing on the edge of ruin who had chosen her to either save him or fall with him. And as thunder rolled, Elena knew the choice before her was no longer whether she would play the perfect wife. It was whether she would dare to love a man who might burn the world down just to keep her in his arms. The night bled into morning, but neither Damien nor Elena had slept. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed pale and gray, yet the silence in the safe house felt more dangerous than the thunder ever had. Elena sat at the long oak table, staring at the photographs Damien had pinned across the wall. Romano's men, bank ledgers, coded messages that hinted at betrayals within Cross Industries. Each picture felt like a thread, and together they formed a web that seemed impossible to escape. Damien stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt streaked faintly with dried blood. He looked less like a tycoon and more like a commander in the middle of a war. His voice was steady but carried the weight of exhaustion when he spoke. Romano is tightening the noose. He has men inside my board, in my security, even in the press. He wants to strip me piece by piece until there's nothing left. Elena lifted her eyes to him, her heart thudding. And me? Where do I fit into his plan? Damien's gaze held hers, fierce and unwavering. You are the weapon he thinks he can use to break me. He believes if he takes you, I will crumble the way I did when Caroline died. Her breath caught. And will you? For a moment his mask cracked and something raw flickered in his eyes. I would burn everything I have built before I let that happen. The words should have comforted her, but instead they struck deep, both terrifying and intoxicating. To be wanted with such ferocity was like standing too close to fire. It warmed and it scorched all at once. A sharp knock echoed through the hallway and both of them froze. Damien drew his gun, motioning for her to stay silent. He opened the door with caution, revealing a familiar face, a man in a tailored suit, damp from the rain. Elena recognized him from the gala, one of Damien's board members. His name was Markham. Damien's voice was low and dangerous. You should not be here. Markham's eyes flicked nervously toward Elena before settling on Damien. I came to warn you. Romano is planning something bigger than you realize. Tonight. Damien's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his jaw tighten. What is it? Markham hesitated, his gaze darting between them. He intends to expose your marriage. He has proof, documents that say Elena was bought to cover your debts, not hers. He wants to make the city believe she's nothing but a contract bride. Elena's stomach dropped, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. Proof. How could he have proof? Damien stepped forward, eyes cold as steel. Because someone close to me gave it to him. Markham lowered his voice. He will release it at midnight unless you surrender control of the merger. The air grew heavy, the weight of betrayal pressing down on them. Elena's chest ached as her mind reeled. If the world believed Romano's story, she would not only lose her father's legacy, but be branded a fraud, a scandal, a pawn in Damien's empire. She forced herself to speak, her voice trembling but strong. Then we give them something stronger than his lies. Damien turned sharply to her. What do you mean? Her pulse raced, but she met his gaze without flinching. If Romano's plan is to make the world believe this marriage is fake, then we make it undeniable that it is real. We show them more than papers and contracts. We show them us. The silence between them vibrated with tension. Damien's eyes searched hers, as if trying to measure just how far she was willing to go. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. Once we cross that line, Elena, there is no going back. Her heart pounded as she whispered, then maybe that is exactly what we need. The clock ticked in the background, each second pulling them closer to midnight, closer to a choice that would decide not only their survival, but whether the world would see them as husband and wife, or as pawns about to be destroyed. The city glowed under midnight lights, but for Elena, the air felt suffocating, charged with the weight of everything about to collapse. She stood at the top of the grand staircase inside Damien's safe house, her silk dress clinging to her trembling frame, the diamond on her finger catching the faint glow of chandeliers. Tonight was the deadline. Romano's proof would be released to the world if they did nothing, and every whisper about their marriage would become a dagger aimed straight at her heart. Damien entered the room dressed in black, his presence sharp and commanding, as if even the shadows bent to him. He held a phone in one hand, his expression carved from steel. Romano is moving, he said. In less than an hour, the city will see forged contracts, false witnesses, and lies so carefully spun they will tear us apart. Unless we stop him. Elena's pulse hammered. Then stop him. Show them the truth. Damien's eyes darkened. Truth does not matter to men like Romano. Power does. If we are to survive this, Elena, we cannot simply deny his lies. We must become something he cannot touch. He stepped closer, the storm in his gaze crashing into hers. You asked me what happens when we cross that line. This is it. If the world believes our love is real, his proof will crumble before it ever leaves his hands. But once we do this, there is no pretending. Her heart raced with fear and longing all tangled into one. She thought of her father's ruined school, of the debt that had forced her into this bargain, of the whispers at the gala, of the blood spilled in this very house. And yet through it all, she had felt Damien's fierce protection, his broken confessions, his dangerous devotion. She stepped forward, lifting her chin. Then let's give the world no choice but to believe. The moment between them stretched, sharp as the edge of a blade. Then Damien caught her face in his hands and kissed her, not the calculated gesture of a businessman, but the desperate claim of a man who had finally surrendered. The kiss seared through her, powerful enough to silence every doubt. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breath uneven. If Romano wants proof, we will give him something undeniable. Minutes later, they stood together before the cameras Damien had summoned. A press conference called in haste but already swarming with reporters hungry for scandal. Flashes lit the air like lightning. Romano's men would be watching, waiting for the slightest falter. Elena's knees threatened to buckle, but Damien's hand tightened around hers, grounding her. He addressed the crowd, his voice steady, his words sharp as weapons. They say my marriage is a sham. They say this woman was bought, her innocence traded like a commodity. He paused, drawing Elena closer until the crowd gasped. But let me tell you the truth. I did not buy her. I fought for her. I chose her. And now I would burn my empire to the ground before I let anyone take her from me. Gasps rippled through the room, but Damien's next gesture silenced them all. He bent, not as a tycoon commanding the world, but as a man laying down his pride, and pressed a kiss to Elena so raw, so undeniable, that the whispers turned into stunned silence. The cameras caught everything, each flash sealing their fate in the eyes of the world. When the conference ended and the doors closed behind them, Elena leaned into Damien's chest, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. Did it work? She whispered. Damien's phone buzzed. He looked down, and a rare smile touched his lips. Romano just canceled the release. His proof is worthless now. We won. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but before she could speak, Damien's expression shifted, a shadow flickering across his features. There's something I still need to tell you. Her breath caught. What is it? He cupped her face, his voice quiet but heavy. Romano wasn't the only one who wanted leverage over me. The man who gave him those forged documents was Markham, my own board member. The betrayal was real, Elena, and the war isn't over. Her heart clenched at the revelation, but she saw the truth in his eyes. They had faced fire and storm together, and though more battles loomed, she no longer felt like a pawn. She was his partner now, forged in danger and desire. She pressed her hand over his, her voice steady. Then let them come. We faced them together. For the first time since she had met him, Damien's mask cracked into something almost like peace. Together, he repeated, as though the word itself was a vow. Outside, the city buzzed with scandal and speculation, but inside the safe house, Elena knew one truth above all. Their marriage had begun as a bargain, but it had transformed into something neither of them had expected. Something dangerous, consuming, and real. And as Damien held her close, she realized she no longer feared the darkness ahead. For she had fallen in love with it, and with the man who carried it in his soul.